This video is sponsored by Ground News. Why hello my fellow apes, I hope you are well. Today we're going to embark on a journey to explore the intricate relationship between storytelling, cultural identity, and religion. Storytelling, one of our oldest art forms, often serves a grand purpose, to glorify the past and create heroes, and in doing so shape our cultural and religious identities. However, while we can develop beyond our heritage, all while maintaining respect for it, this becomes quite the complex task for those with religious beliefs. Acknowledging that our stories, and by extension our morality, can change over time is a challenging concept for the religious mind. In fact, more often than not, the religious deny any change at all, instead opting to spin a narrative to downplay or even justify the atrocities of their religious heroes and even God. We'll get to contemporary examples soon enough, but first, let's appreciate an example that was once ever present, yet is now only in the pages of history. The Romans had more than their fair share of tales that cast their heroes in less than stellar roles, and we're turned now to one of Rome's founding stories, a tale that certainly doesn't paint its heroes in a favourable light: the rape of the Sabine. Ground News is a website and app that effortlessly compares news across the political spectrum, providing transparency in terms of factual reliability and bias. Let's dive into an example. On the homepage, we can see a variety of stories, such as a Brit carving his name on the wall of the ancient Roman Colosseum. Evidently, this incident has sparked outrage in Italy and globally. And you know what? I'm among the outraged. Whoever you are, you're a prick. As we scroll down, we can see various outlets who have reported the incident, and on the side we can see the biased distribution. To my surprise, it turns out that more left-leaning sources are reporting this. That, to me at least, is an interesting insight. I would have thought that conservatives typically care a bit more about the conservation of old architecture, but I guess I'm wrong. And that isn't at all the first time that Ground News has dispensed with my intuition. Scrolling down, we can see when and who broke the story, the ownership of the outlets, and the factual status of the story. This useful information is also reflected in the listed articles. We can see that the Daily Mirror, for instance, has mixed factuality. So there's just a taster. Ground News provides this data on all breaking news, and thus helps you understand and appreciate alternative narratives and mindsets. If you're like me, in the sense that you're someone who wants to engage in conversations with people from different walks of life, then Ground News is an invaluable tool. So, if you too would like to be better informed for a very reasonable price, then please click my link below, or go to ground.news/rationality. Thanks. The parallels between ancient myths and the Bible have been discussed by scholars for millennia, but despite numerous correlates, the three great monotheistic faiths still maintain that their core beliefs are unique. The truth, however, is that these religions are very much a product of their time and environment. They embody notions and myths that were popular among the masses that forged them. For instance, the notion of a supernatural entity sacrificing themselves for the betterment of humanity was extremely prevalent during Jesus' day, and had been long lingering in various myths or religions for eons. For instance, Prometheus, a titan in Greek culture, defied the gods by stealing fire and giving it to humanity, an act that enabled progress and civilization. Similarly, in the Near East, the storm god Baal was believed to die and be resurrected annually, symbolizing the cycle of the seasons and the fertility of the land. In the same vein, the Sumerian goddess Inanna, or Ishtar according to the Babylonians, descended into the underworld, effectively dying and then was resurrected, bringing fertility to the earth. These narratives, among others, highlight the recurring theme of divine sacrifice for the benefit of humanity, a concept that was well established by the time of Jesus. Then we have parallels between the stories of Romulus and Remus and Cain and Abel, with the fraternal conflict of each ending with one brother dead. Likewise, there's striking similarities between Jesus and the Egyptian god Osiris. Both died and resurrected, and both resurrections are seen as ushering in eternal life and salvation for humanity. But for our purposes today, we're going to focus on the founding myth of Rome, or as the Romans would have called it, the founding fact of Rome, the rape of the Sabine. Before we delve into the details, however, let me give you a quick rundown. This ancient tale unfolds in the early days of Rome, when the city was populated by mostly men, which meant that reproduction was a bit of a problem. In a bid to secure wives, the founding father of Rome, Romulus, invited the neighbouring Sabines to a festival. Unbeknownst to the Sabines, however, this was a ruse. In the midst of the festives, the Roman men seized the Sabine women, sparking a war that only ended when the women, now wives and mothers of Roman children, intervened. There's the gist of it, at least. Now we can sink our teeth into the details. The rape of the Sabine occurred shortly after the death of Remus, as outlined by Mary Beard in her book SPQR. Indeed, finally, I get to quote the book that's been behind me for all these years. Praise Jupiter! Remus was dead, and the city that he had helped to found consisted of just a handful of Romulus's friends and companions. It needed more citizens, so Romulus declared Rome an asylum and encouraged the rabble and the dispossessed of the rest of Italy to join him. Runaway slaves, convicted criminals, exiles and refugees. This produced plenty of men, but in order to get the women, so Livy's story goes, Romulus had to resort to a ruse and to rape. He invited the neighbouring peoples, the Sabines and the Latins, from the area around Rome known as Latium, to come and enjoy a religious festival plus entertainments, family and all. In the middle of the proceedings, he gave a signal for his men to abduct the young women among the visitors and carry them off as their wives. Now, let's be real, this isn't exactly Pride and Prejudice, is it?
May I have the next dance, Miss Elizabeth?
This doesn't really paint a glorified view of Rome's founding history. In fact, it's a tad problematic. I'd wager that pretty much everyone watching has immediately recognised that Rome, perhaps the most powerful and influential society in human history, has at its foundation an abysmal crime against humanity.
As for you, you will love me.
However, lucky for us, there have been spin doctors for as long as there's been storytelling. So, what possible reasons could there be to justify this act of abduction and rape? Well, let's first turn to the Roman historian Titus Livius, or Livy as he's known to us, and look at his take on how Romulus, the founding father of Rome, addressed the issue. But Romulus himself went among them and explained that the pride of their parents had caused this deed, when they had refused their neighbours the right to intermarry. Nevertheless, the daughters should be wedded and become co-partners in all the possessions of the Romans, in their citizenship, and, dearest privilege of all the human race, in their children. Only let them moderate their anger and give their hearts to those whom fortune had given their persons. A sense of injury had often given place to affection, and they would find their husbands the kinder for this reason, that every man would earnestly endeavour not only to be a good husband, but also to console his wife from the home and parents she had lost. His arguments were seconded by the wooing of the men, who excused their act on the score of passion and love, the most moving of all pleas to a woman's heart. The resentment of the brides was already much diminished at the very moment when their parents, in mourning garb and with tears and lamentations, were attempting to arouse their states to action. So, what are we hearing here? Well, let's put on our Roman apologetic garb, shall we? In short, Livy's making clear, very clear, that there's context that justifies the abduction. In fact, it's hardly fair to even call it an abduction. First, the Romans didn't just invite the Sabine over to get them drunk and rape their women. No, this is an ill-informed, low-resolution, new Christian Reddit depiction of the events. It's a straw man. Indeed, as Romulus expressed, the Sabine had already pridefully and spitefully disregarded the Romans, simply because they're Roman, and in doing so, they ensured that the Romans would die out. That is genocide. Second, the Romans were not there to take the Sabine women, but to give the Sabine people Roman wealth and fortune. The Romans wanted to give the Sabine people Roman citizenship, and, dearest privilege to all the human race, Roman children. This isn't brutality, it's the kindest act the Romans could offer. It's love. Third, as Livy wisely put it, a sense of injury often gives place to affection. And because of the sense of injury, and I say sense because it's not really an injury, the Roman husbands were kinder for this reason. They were better husbands. Each earnestly endeavoured not only to be a good husband, but also to console his wife for the home and parents she had lost. Fourth, and as any real man or indeed woman knows, the most moving of all pleas to a woman's heart is the wooing of men, acting on passion and love. And this explains, of course, why the resentment of the brides was already much diminished at the very moment when their parents were attempting to arouse their states to action. Indeed, the Romans took the women out of passion and love. The rape of the Sabine was thus not a sick and despicable act, but rather a loving and caring one that requires just a little bit of context and, dare I say, reflection to understand. Look, don't listen to most of those that object, because more often than not, it's abundantly obvious that they haven't read the works of Livy or Cicero, or basically any Roman literature. They're philosophically illiterate, and it shows. They're not interested in knowing, much less respecting, our cultural heritage. They have no interest in history. They are prideful, just as the Sabine were. But in case you're still in doubt of Livy's explanation, let's consider what the Greek philosopher Plutarch had to say about the act. Some say that only 30 maidens were seized, and that from these the Curii were named. But Valerius Antius puts the number at 527, and Juba at 683. All maidens. And this was the strongest defence which Romulus could make, namely that they took only one married woman, Hersilia, and her by mistake, since they did not commit the rape out of wantonness, nor even with a desire to do mischief, but with a fixed purpose of uniting and blending the two people into the strongest bonds. So again, we see that the rape of the Sabine wasn't so much a rape in any real sense of the word. Of all the women that the Romans gave their heart to, only one, let me repeat that, one was married, and they took her, Hersilia, by mistake. You see, many atheists and Christians simply assume that the Romans tore families apart, stealing aristocratic women, but this simply reveals, again, that they haven't read up on Plutarch, or any scholars to be frank. Honestly, it's genuinely pretty sad how little they know of the things they criticize. It's very immature. As any historian will tell you, life was very difficult for all societies during the formation of the Eternal City, and harder still for the maidens without title. The Romans gifted these young women with wealth, fortune, and love, and were very selective to whom they offered their hand. Okay, let's pause our Roman apologetics for a moment. To our modern minds, the defences we've just heard are frankly fucked up post hoc rationalizations to what can only be described as a truly fucked up act. The Romans kidnapped women. They forced them into sexual slavery. The Sabine women had no say in their binds. Any whisper of yes would have been squeezed out of them through the tight grip of extortion. Please, the Romans romantically gestured, hear my heart. Do you want to share in the spoils, or be them? Unsurprisingly, the Sabines did not simply accept that their women had been taken, and so they went to war with the Romans to get them back. But worry not, dear viewer, for yet again we can expose that the barbarians know not of what they speak. As Livy explains, even the Sabine women themselves were happy to have been taken, and in their wisdom blamed themselves for the war, not the Romans. Then the Sabine women, whose wrong had given rise to the war with loosened hair and torn garments, their woman's timidity lost in a sense of their misfortune, dared to go amongst the flying missiles, and rushed in from the side to part the hostile forces and disarm them of their anger, beseeching their fathers on this side, on that their husbands, that fathers-in-laws and sons-in-laws should not stain themselves with impious bloodshed, nor pollute with parricide the suppliant's children, grandsons to the one party and sons to the other. If you regret, they continued, the relationship that unites you, if you regret the marriage tie, then turn your anger against us. We are the cause of the war, the cause of wounds, and even death to both our husbands and our parents. It will be better for us to perish than to live lacking either of you, as widows or as orphans. It was a touching plea, not only to the rank and file, but to their leaders as well. A stillness fell on them, and a sudden hush. Then the leaders came forward to make a truce, and not only did they agree on peace, but they made one people out of the two. Now, isn't that beautiful? Let me read those last words from Livy again. Then the leaders came forward to make a truce, and not only did they agree on peace, but they made one people out of the two. That is scripture. It's sublime. You see, the rape of the Sabine isn't what old atheists and new Christians make it out to be. Their one-dimensional take exposes that they know nothing of the Eternal City, nothing of Romulus and Remus, and nothing of the very foundation of Western civilization. I will act, as Romans do, with grace and humility towards such petulance, but I can understand why so many mock these fools. Perhaps one day, like the Sabine women, they will part with their pride and come to reason. That, at least, is my hope. Right, I opened by saying that there's striking similarities between the religions of today and the religions that occupied the locations in which these religions emerged, and we've just seen a great example. Just as the Christians, Muslims and Jews blame women for the fault of men, so too did the Romans. Once again, we can see that the wars of men are caused by the loosened hair and torn garments of women. You see, women ruin all civilizations.
I think it's a good lesson for us today, which is that the tyrant is empowering women to kill their men.
We're told that if the Sabine women had not rejected the Romans' love, and the Sabine men had not so pridefully condemned the Romans' desire to unite, then so much blood would have never soaked the ground. Yeah, most rational individuals today, if not all, will look upon the apologetic acrobatics just witnessed and see it for what it is, a fucked up attempt to justify something that cannot be justified. Now, just for the fun of it, let's change the setting slightly, and instead of calling it the rape of the Sabine, let's call it the rape of the Shiloh. Transitioning from the Roman narrative, we find a similar theme in the biblical story of the rape of the Shiloh. In this tale, the men of the tribe of Benjamin, having been decimated in a war and left without women, are given the green light to kidnap women from Shiloh during a festival, just as the Romans were. And like the Romans, the men of Benjamin are portrayed as victims of circumstance, driven to commit an atrocity out of desperation. The narrative, while acknowledging the horror of the act, subtly shifts the blame from the perpetrators to the circumstances, thus diluting the severity of the crime. That's the gist of it, at least, but now let's dive into the details. In Judges 19, a Levite and his concubine travel to a territory owned by the Benjaminites, one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and they're given hospitality by an old man. While staying there, a group of wicked men of the city surrounded the house and issued a demand to the host. Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him. Yep, it's another biblical rape story. Mazel tov. Anyhow, the host steps outside and tells the wicked men, "No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing. Look, here's my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out to you now, and you can use them and do to them whatever you wish. But as for this man, don't do such an outrageous thing." The wicked men, however, wouldn't listen, and so the concubine was sent outside only to get gang-raped, tortured, and eventually murdered. The traveller then took the concubine home and cut her into 12 pieces to send into all the areas of Israel. What the fuck am I reading? The tribes of Israel united and eventually prevailed over the tribe of Benjamin, but they killed a few too many of the Benjaminites, who now didn't have enough women to survive. You know, a similar problem to the early Romans. Fortunately, the tribes of Israel discovered that no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the camp for the assembly, and so the Israelites marched into their land and put to the sword those living there, including the women and children. The Romans didn't do that though, did they? Indeed, the tribes insisted that they must kill every male and every woman who was not a virgin. They found among the people living in Jabesh Gilead 400 young women who had never slept with a man, and they took them to the camp at Shiloh in Canaan. Unfortunately, however, this didn't yield enough wives, and so the Israelites conjured a great idea. "Look," they said, "there is an annual festival of the Lord in Shiloh. Why don't you Benjaminites go and hide in the vineyards and watch? And then, when the young women of Shiloh come out to join in the dancing, rush from the vineyards and each of you sees one of them to be your wife." Yeah, this really does sound familiar, doesn't it? I'm getting a bit of a Romulus feel. if you know what I mean. Each event occurs at a festivity, and each event includes the kidnapping of women in order to satisfy the need for a tribe to live on. Now, fortunately, Jewish and Christian apologists do not feel the urge to jump to the defense of the Israelites here. And the reason they don't justify the mass rape and abduction described in Judges is because they believe that, at the time, God's grasp wasn't upon the world. Or as Christian apologist Skip Heitzig puts it,
"They're simply little insights, soap operas, to let you know how bad life was morally and spiritually for the nation. There was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes." That is a repeated phrase.
So what we're seeing here is mass rape and murder with theists recognizing it as much.
There was no king in Israel.
Those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit.
We have just read chapter after chapter after chapter of people doing what is right in their own eyes. Moral and social, spiritual, existentialism and degradation. So the men of Gibeah did what was right in their own eyes, ravishing the young girl all night long. That's what they wanted to do. They did what was right in their own eyes. The old man and the Levite did what was right in their own eyes. They threw the girls outside. The children of Israel did what was right in their own eyes. Let's just destroy the Benjamites. And then, they need wives. We can't be out of a tribe, so let's just steal a few wives. Let's kill a few people and give those girls to them. Everyone does what is right in his own eyes. Now, mark this. Because it's written in the Bible, it's not like an example all the time of good behavior. This isn't like, okay, so I'm supposed to obey what the Bible, I'm supposed to do this. No. This is a bad example in the Bible.
Alright, so why are we looking at this example? Simply put, it gives us an insight into the apologetic mindset, and the key takeaway here is that apologists don't see the need to twist the rape of the Shiloh as to paint the rapists as the good guys. But now let's turn our attention to a rape that they not only twist, but shape into a pretzel. Before we delve into the deep end, let's set the scene. We're going to take a look at Numbers 31, 17 through 18, a passage from the Old Testament that's a bit of a head-scratcher. Many of you will be well aware of these verses, but for those of you who are not, in this story, God gives Moses, the revered prophet, some pretty shocking instructions for him and his army to carry out. Namely, to ride into the lands of the Midianites to kill every male among them, as well as every woman that have slept with a man, but to spare the virgin girls as sex slaves. Here's the King James Version. "Now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that have known a man by lying with him. But all the women children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves." These verses are very problematic for anyone attempting to defend the Bible. After all, they make the rape of the Sabine look like child's play, and over the years many have recognized as much. For instance, referring to this supposed event, Thomas Paine wrote the following in The Age of Reason. "Among the detestable villains in any period of the world that have disgraced the name of man, it is impossible to find a greater than Moses, if this account be true. Here is an order to butcher the boys, to massacre the mothers, and debauch the daughters. Let any mother put herself in the situation of those mothers, one child murdered, another destined to violation, and herself in the hands of an executioner. Let any daughter put herself in the situation of those daughters, destined as a prey to the murderers of a mother and a brother, and what will be their feelings? It is in vain that we attempt to impose upon nature, for nature will have her course, and the religion that tortures all her social ties is a false religion." Indeed, the acts of Moses and the Israelites in Numbers 31, 17 through 18 are utterly despicable through and through. But because the armies are the heroes in the biblical narrative, theists are forced to spin a story which presents them in a good light. That is, apologists treat Numbers 31 in precisely the same way that the Romans treat the rape of the Sabine.
So the idea is that these women have seduced the Israelite men into sexual immorality. And so the command is, as punishment, that they are to be put to death. However, those among the Midianite women who have not seduce the men into sexual immorality. They're to be spared. So their lives are actually to be spared from death. And they are to be brought into the Israelite community and to be wives to the men of Israel.
So yes, most apologists won't touch these verses with a barge pole, and those that do tend to skip over the kidnapping of the women children. Still, when an apologist does provide commentary on this detail, they treat it as something of a banality. As an example, let's lend the floor again to Pastor Skip.
But still, we have difficulty with the extermination of a race. What you don't know that causes you concern, it's because you don't know the lowest level of immorality they were operating at, the Canaanite civilizations, and this group in particular. In their worship system was heterosexual sexual activity with prostitutes of temples, homosexuality, bestiality, and the sacrifice of their babies into open fires. They were at such a low level that one commentator, one source that I read, said it would have been impossible for their civilization to continue to survive anyway with just their practices. Hundreds of years God was patient until the iniquity of the Amorites, as we read in Genesis, was full, and then God moved. He did the same in the flood. The whole world was destroyed in the flood, save 8 people. And now he uses, or would use, the children of Israel as his rod in the land of Canaan.
I see. The reason those little boys needed a blade across their throat, and why those little girls needed to be abducted as sex slaves, is because they were wicked.
And as for you, you will love me.
In fact, those children were so damn wicked that they probably wouldn't have survived anyway.
It would have been impossible for their civilization to continue to survive anyway.
So God, being all-loving, did those children a favor, didn't he?
Now he uses, or would use, the children of Israel as his rod in the land of Canaan.
Yep. God used the Israelite children as a means, a rod, to an end, the extermination of the Midianites, and he awarded the Israelites with wealth, fortune, and child sex slaves. God is good, I think. Right, let's take our Abrahamic apologist hat off for just a moment to truly consider the implications of this staggering narrative. The cultural lens through which we often view these ancient texts can sometimes blur the stark reality of their content. What we're witnessing here is a masterclass in apologetics. We see the brutal genocide and violation of an entire people being spun in such a way so that the perpetrators emerge as the heroes in the narrative. Moses and his army, acting as instruments of God, are portrayed as saviors who rescued those little innocent virgin girls from a fate worse than death. Yeah, I've got to give it to the apologists here. The prowess of their apologetic acrobatics would have made Livy and Plutarch blush. Alright, so I'm not yet convinced, I don't know about you, but maybe we just haven't heard from the right apologist. So let's give the floor to Dr. Paul Copen, author of Is God a Vindictive Bully?, who addressed Numbers 31, 17 through 18 in an interview with Sean McDowell.
Well, a couple of things. One is that the presumption in Israel was that sexual relations was to be within a marriage context. Of course, we see the biblical vision for that spelled out in Genesis 2:24. For this cause, a man will leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And so this is the presumption that the leaving and then the cleaving and then the one flesh, that's the order of things. And we see that actually in Deuteronomy, where you have the passage in Deuteronomy 21 where there is a woman who is taken as a prisoner of war who can become a wife to, say, an Israelite soldier. But there has to be a marriage ceremony first, but even before that, there has to be a waiting period of a month before that is undertaken. So she takes off her old clothes, puts on new ones. She's in mourning. She shaves her hair, clips her nails to show a separation from her previous way of life, her culture, her family, and that she is going to be embarking on another one. This is a very humane, kind, gracious, compassionate way of arranging things. It's not war, rape, which you do see with other nations, Assyria, Egypt, and so forth. That is not taking place within Israel. That was not an appropriate sexual expression. It had to be within the context of marriage.
Well, damn. If my skin wasn't crawling before, it certainly is now. What we're witnessing here, of course, is a very similar justification to that presented by Livy and Plutarch, with the emphasis in both cases being on the fact that the women were taken to be married, to be loved. Well, I say that, but the women being women is only true of the Romans, because while the Romans took unmarried maidens, Moses took women children. Yeah, that's quite a big difference, ain't it? It's a bit of a symmetry breaker. Oh, and how can we forget? Another key difference is that unlike Romulus, who didn't slaughter the Sabine, Moses slaughtered the Midianite men and women, be them 20 years old or 80, and all the little boys, including the babies. Yeah, that's a little bit hard to square.
This is a very humane, kind, gracious, compassionate way of arranging things.
Oh, really, Paul? You think? So I guess that you'd be fine with an army, under God, storming into your land and butchering your boy and debauching your daughter. Bullshit. Give me a break. No good God would use the innocent as cannon fodder. He's all-powerful, damn it.
There has to be a marriage ceremony first, but even before that, there has to be a waiting period of a month.
Well, damn, Paul. Why didn't you pull out this 4D chess move earlier? And why didn't Plutarch think of this? Yes, abducting little girls for the express purpose of sexual slavery appears to be a little problematic, but once you contextualize the abduction with another biblical book, which is saturated with endorsements of slavery, Deuteronomy, then you realize that Moses' army waited at least a month before marrying these children, and hence it's perfectly fine.
This is a very humane...
Indeed, very humane. Well played, sir. And to think, to win this battle, you only needed to lose your humanity. Alright, let's pause and recall for a moment that the Book of Judges depicts the stealing of women for marriage, and no apologist defends this. No, to the contrary, they emphasize the lack of morality, the barbarism of such an act.
There was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
But when, in the Book of Numbers, God commands the same act, plus further atrocities, apologists defend it with vigor and the utmost confidence.
Kind, gracious, compassionate way of arranging things. It's not war rape.
Indeed, they spin a story to soothe the cognitive dissonance of the desperate. They assure us that the armies of Moses were the good guys. They slaughtered the men, women, and little boys, and stole the little girls for themselves, to do the Midianites a favor. Well, if you earnestly believe this, then do me a favor, will you? And wake the fuck up. The repulsiveness of this defense is almost beyond belief. But hey, when apologists are forced to take on the less savory passages of the Bible, it's not a surprise that they reflect the same craftiness as the ancient Romans, is it? Be they in the name of Romulus or in the name of Moses, apologists will find a way to justify the most horrific atrocities on absurdities. But again, it makes sense, doesn't it? After all, who would be proud to know that their group identity was built in large part on rape? Especially if you're going to claim that an Omnimax God commanded such a foundation. No, you are the good guys, remember, and so you can't call a spade a spade. Instead, you need only dismiss people like me as theologically uninformed. Good game. Now that we've unpacked the complexities and controversies of Numbers 31, 17 through 18, it's time to step back and see the bigger picture. This isn't just one shocking passage in the Bible, it's about how stories, even the difficult and uncomfortable ones, shape our understanding of morality, culture, and religion. So with that in mind, let's draw some conclusions. Because of cultural context, many of us will watch the likes of Paul Copan pathetically attempt to justify deeply immoral acts in the Bible without batting an eyelid. And yet, when we see an equivalent apologist attempt to justify deeply immoral acts within other religious frameworks that we're not culturally intimate with and thus don't have emotional connection to, it's immediately obvious, grotesquely obvious even, that the apologist is desperately trying to justify the unjustifiable. But if we remove the geographic attachment, there is no meaningful difference between these cases. If anything, in fact, the rape of the Midianites eclipses the rape of the Sabine. When I watch theists, and especially apologists, try to justify Numbers 31, I, like Thomas Paine and so many others, am fucking disgusted. It aggravates me to no end that our fears can be so easily twisted as to squeeze from us our humanity. It's often said that religion can cause otherwise good people to do wicked things, and I think very good examples of this are to be found in apologists when they're confronting problematic scripture. The amount of otherwise decent people I've interacted with that bend themselves backwards to paint such atrocities as acts of love is genuinely one of the saddest observations of my life. In Numbers 31, the Israelites stormed into a city and executed all of the men, women, and little boys. Now, per Paine's request, just stop and think about this for a moment. If you have a little boy, stop failing to empathize and really consider how you would feel if strangers barged into your city and cut down your innocent boy. And if you have a little girl, just stop and think about violent men abducting them for themselves. Violent men who practice sexual slavery and carry a book that specifically and explicitly states what they can and can't do with their slaves.
Isn't kidnapping wonderful?
And guess what? That book further specifies that the slaves that they take from the lands around them, which includes your land, for the record, are to be treated like cattle, as possessions that can be handed down like some family fleshlight. It's often expected of atheists like me, demanded even, that I treat scripture with delicacy and reverence, but it's theists that fail to read it for what it is. You fail your God. Disgusted by God's commands, each generation of theists recreate God in their own image, and then accuse the likes of me to be the blasphemer. Please, for the love of God, wake the fuck up. No good God would sign off on this monstrosity. If there's a good God, it had no hand in writing these verses. If you were disgusted at all by how Livy and the Romans defend the rape of the Sabine, and you were not disgusted by Paul Copan and others pulling the same bullshit apologetic acrobatics when it comes to many verses in the Bible, you have lost your humanity. Anyhow, as always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to my wonderful patrons and YouTube members. So again, we see that the rape of the Sabine wasn't so much a rape in any real sense of the word. Oh my goodness. This is what apologists do. Like, they do this with Numbers 31. Oh God.